Once, long ago, the face of the Sultai was a human. Tasigur was the final human ruler of the clan. Being made Khan of the Sultai at a young age did nothing to humble him. His prized possession was his throne made of jade and emblazoned with gold and jewels, a symbol of his regency. His opulent palace was where his loyal subjects would convene. Among the human servants were zombie thralls that did their Khan's bidding thanks to his many Naga necromancers. Many powerful and harrowing magics were created by both Naga and Rakshasa, the latter of which were dark soothsayers that secretly worked not for their Khan but for the betterment of the Sultai. Tasigur's pampered and luxurious rule had made him cruel and callous to these subjects. His weapon of choice was a multi-headed whip tipped with razor-edged talons, a weapon he took great pleasure in using. Eventually, his cruelty would cost him these powerful spellcasters at his disposal. They deceived him and defected to the ranks of the monstrous dragon of the swamps. Without the ability to control the zombie hordes, and without the magical forces of the Rakshasa and Naga, the Sultai's downfall was all but certain. However, with events out of Tasigur's control, his fate and the entirety of Tarkir was shifted into a new destiny, a new future. Two warring brothers fought over the skies of Tarkir, and one was dealt a mortal wound. Before, the spirit dragon Ugin had died, and with his death the power of the dragons faded with him. Now, the planeswalker Sarkhan has returned to his home plane, plagued by endless whispers that have directed him far beyond to Tarkir's past, to this pivotal moment in time, where he might save the spirit dragon's life, and in doing so, irrevocably change the plane's future. Without Ugin's death, the dragon tempests have intensified, birthing more and more ravenous spawn, making it impossible for the clans of Tarkir to subdue the growing threat. Tasigur, with the growing desperation, pleaded to the invading dragon Silumgar by offering up his throne, the symbol of his reign. The offering seemed to have worked in Tasigur's favor, as the Dragon Lord had a task for him. The Khans of Tarkir held a summit to devise a plan to stop the dragons before their own eradication. But before they could do so, two of the Dragon Lords appeared with their broods in tow. Having been assisted by Tasigur in betraying the other Khans, the dragons decimated what little resistance was before them. For his efforts, Tasigur was not reinstated as Khan as he was promised, but was instead tricked, enchained, and made a living trophy for the new ruler of the swamplands. And now, hundreds of years after Tasigur's death, the Dragon Lord Silumgar still holds his trophy close. Tasigur is one of my favorite commanders to play, and I wanted to give a little lore before I got into talking about my favorite format in Magic. And if I'm being honest, after reading some of the stories that showcase him, I feel like Tasigur the card is much more menacing than Tasigur the character. Tasigur the Golden Fang is a 4/5 human shaman, casting 5 generic and 1 black. So 6 mana total. Now Tasigur is a mono black creature card, but due to the colors of mana needed to activate his second ability, Tasigur's color identity is black, blue, and green, opening us up to some strong search and ramp options. So 6 mana might sound like a lot for a commander's casting cost, but luckily Tasigur has a built-in mana reduction in the form of Delve. Delve reads, each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana. Simply put, if we exile 5 cards with this ability, then Tasigur will only cost 1 black mana. Delve on cards like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time are strong enough to make their casting costs trivial, but when put on a commander, it also takes into account the commander's tax that Tasigur would receive from being sent back to the command zone. And not only commander tax, but any tax including those our opponents can put on us, like from Lodestone Golem or Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. As long as we have cards in our graveyard to exile for Tasigur and any additional taxes, we can continuously cast our commander for just 1 black mana. So big deal, Tasigur is just a Gurmag Angler, sure, but it's the next ability that rounds out this commander. For 2 generic and 2 blue-green hybrid mana, which is 4 mana total, put the 2 top cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a non-land card of an opponent's choice from your graveyard to your hand. As a side note, the wording of this ability has changed to mill 2 cards, then return a non-land card of an opponent's choice from your graveyard to your hand. So let me reword this one real quick. For 4 mana, we mill 2 cards, and then an opponent picks a non-land card in our graveyard to return to our hand. And the card returned to our hand can be any non-land, not just either of these two recently milled cards. Pretty simple. Things get a little more complicated when we look at the wording of this ability. One thing that is lacking is the word target. Many spells and abilities have to have a target for them to properly resolve. A lightning bolt can target Ages of the Gods, but can't target its controller because it's giving its controller hexproof. Hexproof reads, you can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. Tasigur's second ability does not target and circumvents hexproof and shroud in this way. And this works for both choosing a player and that player choosing a card in our graveyard, so cards like Ground Seal won't work on this ability. And choosing an opponent in a 4-player game instantly brings this level of politics to the table. Is choosing the person to lead the best option? Will the person with an open board choose the best card in our graveyard? Can we convince someone to give us a ramp spell that we need? Or can we delve away the irrelevant cards in the graveyard and leave lands and options that will only benefit us? So that was a lot for one card. I'm going to dig into some options to use for building a Tasigur deck. There are a lot of options we can go with, and all of them are good. There's not really a bad way to build Tasigur, I feel, but I'll at least talk about some of the cards I use. So running a slew of mana accelerators is a no-brainer, and we have lots to choose from thanks to our colors. Some important choices I would lead with are Birds of Paradise and Deathrite Shaman, since we are in 3 colors. One important thing to remember with ritual spells in a Tasigur deck like Dark Ritual and Cabal Ritual is that they aid us even further thanks to Tasigur's Delve ability, and that aid also extends to cards like Lotus Petal and, if we're running a copy, Jeweled Lotus. Having a commander with Delve means we need to have our graveyard filled as much as possible. While they are expensive to buy, the fetch lands get additional benefits here, as more Delve choices for our graveyard. In 3 colors, we do even have options to run the fetch lands that don't completely adhere to our colors, to guarantee our dual land picks, and then we can use them for more Delve fodder for Tasigur. Some budget alternatives to them are Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse that will get us basic lands at the very least. As Delve requires the graveyard, we will need ways to fill it, so using cards like Fact or Fiction and Grisly Salvage will give us multiple choices for what we want in both the hand and the graveyard. Plus, we have options for some good Reanimator classics like Reanimate, Animate Dead, and Unearth to grab additional Enter the Battlefield effects for our utility creatures. Eternal Witness and Archaeomancer can get us back some spells of our own choice rather than having an opponent pick. The main win condition I have in Tasigur is with infinite mana. I know it's kind of boring, but with Tasigur's second ability, it's really important here, especially if it's not a once per turn, especially if it's at instant speed. There are a number of ways to do it. The easiest way is probably with High Tide and Palinchron. High Tide will add an additional blue mana when we tap our islands for mana. This will also work on dual lands that have island in their subtype, which is why we want to run duals if we can. When Palinchron enters the battlefield, we will untap up to 7 lands, and with Palinchron's ability, spend 4 mana to return it to our hand. Thanks to High Tide, we'll be netting more mana than we are spending to cast Palinchron. Then, with this infinite mana loop, we're able to use Tasigur's ability to mill ourselves until our opponents give us a large spell like Exsanguinate or Torment of Hailfire. If a large spell isn't available, we could always use Tasigur's ability to mill our entire library and win using a Thassa's Oracle or a Laboratory Maniac. Some big dangers are going to be graveyard hate cards like Rest in Peace. No access to our graveyard means our entire engine is outright turned off. All of our Tasigur plays will be out of commission, so deal with them as soon as possible. Luckily, we're prepared in our colors. Green nets us some good enchantment and artifact removal, black will cover creature removal, and blue will cover countering peskier spells. Playing this style Tasigur specifically relies on digging for our infinite mana pieces and then, with Tasigur, finding a big finisher, but that doesn't mean this is the only way to play it. And obviously, these cards that I've talked about are based off cards that are out today and cards that I'm aware of. There are cards that'll work for this deck that have not come out by the time of this video, and there's cards that I don't know of or haven't popped up in my games. But that's where I need a little bit of help. I want your input. What cards are you running in your Tasigur decks? What has happened during a game with Tasigur at the table? I want to know, so let me know in the comments below. And if you have any ideas or requests for any commanders you want me to talk about in the future, reach out, and I might give them a shot. The link tree with all my socials. I'm Uncool Greg everywhere. This was a lot of fun. Keep an eye out for the next one. Before I go, I did put together 2 Tasigur decks on Archidekt. One's a budget build and one's an expensive build, so you can kind of see some ideas that I have going on. I'll probably edit them as I go. They're not necessarily my exact builds, but there's some concept and ideas that I think of when I build Tasigur. but as time goes on, I am likely to change them up from time to time. And that's it. Cheers.